What's up, guys? Welcome back to Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. And on this episode, we're going to take a deep dive into the PLL Championship Series. And to do that, I've got a couple of guests on the episode here today. We're going to talk with PLL fantasy expert Paul Lamonaca. And then later on in the show, I'll be joined by lacrosse betting expert Hutton Jackson. But to start out the show, to get us kick-started here, we're going to talk with Paul Lamonaca. Paul, thanks for joining me.
Awesome. I appreciate the opportunity, Stevie. So looking forward to talking about the championship series.
Yeah, and good to have you back. I know we had you on a couple times last summer talking some PLL fantasy, so good to get caught up with you here again. So we're going to talk some fantasy here in just a second, but you're also, as we just talked about off air, going to cover the Atlas during the championship series. So I kind of want to start with that and take a look at this Atlas Sixes roster and who maybe outside of, there are some notable names there for the Atlas, but maybe who outside of that sort of core group should we be looking for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like the Atlas roster from the top down. I think is really notable while, they have their core. I think it's more important to note that this is, the first time that Xander Dixon, Connor Schellenberg, and Liam Ettiman, the three youngest stars on this team, are playing in their first ever championship series. So I think it's important to note that while they were super crucial for the team during the summer in 10-on-10 regular lacrosse, it's important to realize how important they are and how vital they are to the success that I believe the Atlas is going to have in sixes this championship series. So I think we really need to take a look at the two-man game with Connor Schellenberger and Xander Dixon, how important of a role that's going to play, especially with both of them going against short sticks. And traditionally, in the field game, they're going against long poles. So I think that's one important thing to look at. Another important part of this roster that I really like is Ronan Jacoby. He was a huge star for the Archers last year in the championship series. I think this was a great pickup for the team heading into this 2025 roster. And then, of course, Lee Mentman. In my opinion, he's the best goalie in the world. I truly do believe he can see the ball like no other. So I think this is he's gonna be the make or break for the Atlas this championship series.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see this Atlas team for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned. There's a lot of those notable names. I thought Ronan Jacoby did a really good job in the championship series last year, as you said. Did really well kind of coming into the mix with this Atlas team over the summer last year. Somebody that I wasn't really familiar with until the championship series, so it was cool to see him kind of come in right away last summer with that Atlas team and make a contribution right away. And I'm a day one Atlas fan, like anybody that's listened to this show knows by now. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how they do this year. One thing that I'll get to you with in a little bit is how they came up a little bit short a couple of years ago in the championship series. So we'll see how they do this time around. But one other thing that I want to ask you about with this Atlas team, Stephen Brooks going to be the head coach for the championship series for them once again, longtime Atlas assistant. With that chaos job that they just hired the new head coach, new GM, he was a finalist for that job. It sounds like. What, in your opinion, does Stephen Brooks have to do to get an opportunity as a head coach in this league?
Keep doing what he's doing. Brooksy's one of the, most like genuine coaches I've ever spoken to, and being able to go on the phone with him, obviously I have the Q's bias with him a little bit, but he's a player's coach. Guys are willing to fight for him. It's tough to see him not grab that job. I was honestly pulling for him, which is it's tough to see, but I do believe Brooks is on the come up for the next big head coaching job in this sport when it comes to professional lacrosse. So I don't really think there's more he really needs to do from whether it's a relationship standpoint or an X's and O standpoint. I truly do believe that he's one of the best minds in professional lacrosse right now. So, I think this opportunity for him to be the head coach of the Atlas in the championship series is only going to even paint more to why he should be a head coach in this league. And I'm excited to see how he's going to be able to rally his troops come next week.
Yeah, and to kind of touch on that last point you made about how he rallies the troops, I think you go back to that 2023 championship series and some of the speeches that he had during some of those games. They were almost borderline Andy Tower-esque I would argue, with some of those that he was firing off during the championship series a couple of years ago. But I think, for at least my point of view on the Stephen Brooks, future head coaching thing, to put kind of more of a local spin on it for me here in Michigan, would kind of be like Ben Johnson just being named a head coach in the NFL. You look at both him and Brooks, both really good young offensive minds in their respective sports. And I think for Johnson, it was kind of a matter of, when, not if, he becomes a head coach. And I think for Brooks, kind of like you were saying, it's more of, I think, the same for him too. So I kind of alluded to this a couple minutes ago with the Atlas, and then we'll dive into some fantasy here to kind of wrap this segment up. But a couple of years ago, Atlas were probably one of the favorites in the championship series. They come up just a little bit short there. What do they have to do this time around to go get that championship series championship?
I think they got to stretch the field a little bit more. I think, the absence of Romar Dennis not being with them this year, you might see a slight difference. But also, you had a great shooter in Connor Schellenberger, and you still have Miles Jones, and you still have Brian Costabile, who proved 2 years ago that he's still one of the best players in sixes. So I just think, being able to finish those games, limit the amount of high scoring that goes into sixes. I really like, like I said earlier, having Liam Entenmann as their netminder. I think this group is poised to have a great championship series run. So I think, it's tough looking back 2 years on it because, the roster's changed so much. But if there's anyone that's going to be able to rally a team around, it's going to be Brian Costabile, just because he probably understood the pain of coming up short last year, especially having a spectacular performance. And also, like, relying on your veteranship and your head coach. I mean, Brooks was there for 2 years ago's championship series, so he obviously knows what he's talking about when it comes to sixes lacrosse, and it's new for everyone. I think everyone's got to realize that sixes is a new format. It's still evolving, and if you look at how sports evolve over time, there's so much change that goes into them. So I think we're going to see a lot of schematics differences. I remember speaking to Brooks about how he's kind of trying to implement basketball plays and basketball tendencies into his sixes roster. So I think they're going to be a very interesting team to watch, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they shape out on Tuesday.
Talking with PLL fantasy expert Paul Lamonaca on Taking the Field with Stevie. A couple questions left for you here, Paul. Now we're going to start getting into some of the fantasy stuff here with you. And we can open this up to all four teams, maybe just start with Atlas first if you want, but we can open it up to all four teams. Who are some of the guys in the championship series that you're going to be taking note of from a fantasy perspective?
I'm interested to see how Grant Ament is going to do. I think, being, the player that he has an opportunity to not only just score, but his ability to feed with the guys around him, I think is only going to benefit him for sixes. I'm a firm believer that Xander Dixon has a really good shot of winning the Golden Stick, just because of how well his game translates. He's going to be able to essentially play box lacrosse with the 6x6 net, which is, any player's dream. A box player's dream, just being able to have so much more room to score and, more error involved. So those are my two guys that I'm really looking forward to. Just from a scoring standpoint. From a defensive standpoint, I said, I'm looking forward to Entenmann. I'm excited to see Brendan Krebs. He had a pretty notable PLL fantasy season. So seeing how he could translate into sixes is going to be really interesting as well. So those are just a couple names that I'm trying to, think of from a fantasy standpoint, because there's not really, how is defense, how do you control defensive players in fantasy stats? It's tougher than it is for 10-on-10 lacrosse. So it's going to be a lot of moving parts, but interested to see how it pans out.
Yeah, and then last question for you here. You kind of touched on it there at the end with that last answer, but obviously sixes being its own thing, still kind of relatively new here in the last year or so. What kind of maybe unique possibilities or maybe some challenges in terms of putting together a fantasy lineup does a format like sixes present?
It's kind of, it could be a toss-up, honestly. The reason I say toss-up, obviously these players are very good, but what is the time frame and how are players training for sixes lacrosse in their respective regions? I think that's a lot that's something that a pro lacrosse fan forgets about, is that, in the off season, it's not as easy as it is for other sports to, have the ability to train with a group of people like it is in the NBA and NFL. Guys definitely need to take a little bit, especially if they have another job, to find the time to train. If it's not during the day, during their 9 to 5. So seeing who will be the best, like it's going to be like I said, a toss up to see who came in the best shape coming into sixes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know I still have to put my lineup together. I'll probably do that later on this week. But I think here talking with you definitely gave me a good sense of direction, kind of good sense of what I should be looking for with that. So, Paul, I want to thank you again for a few minutes of your time.
Awesome. I appreciate talking with you, Stevie.
All right, coming up next on Taking the Field with Stevie Mack, we're going to be joined by lacrosse betting expert Hutton Jackson. All right, welcome back into Taking the Field with Stevie Mack, part 2 of this episode previewing the PLL Championship Series coming up here in just a few days. First segment of the show, we talked with PLL fantasy expert Paul Lamonaca, who also will spend the championship series covering the New York Atlas during that week or so during the championship series. Got to talk with him in segment 1. Segment 2, really excited now to be joined by lacrosse betting expert Hutton Jackson.
Thanks, Stevie, for having me.
Absolutely good to have you on. It was fun talking with you last summer during the PLL regular season, so good to get you back on here for the championship series. So kind of jumping right into it here with this first question. According to DraftKings, it might be different depending on what sites you're looking on. I typically go through DraftKings, but they've got the Utah Archers as the favorites to win the championship series. Do you like that pick, or is there another team that you're kind of looking at there?
Yeah, so I think all the teams are very strong. I know it's a cop-out answer to kind of say that. Going into these, like I tried betting a lot of the futures early on in 2023, kind of to the detriment of it. I think I still ended up like getting by profit-wise. And then last year I decided, hey, I'm just going to bet one. I bet the Cannons, ended up lucking out. They ended up winning it. So I think that's kind of my biggest piece of advice is, if you like one of these teams in particular, then just bet one of these futures or whatever. Don't try to it's so hard with just 4 teams to kind of hedge out later. It's not like the PLL or NLL season where it's so long that you can actually get very good prices early on teams and kind of hedge out and have multiple, angles or whatever. It's very challenging, I think, with this, but I do recommend people shop around. You mentioned the Archers are favored, on DraftKings. I think if you go across the board, I think them and the Atlas are probably favored if you take longest odds. I know Archers are plus 275 on Bet365 and BetMGM. So if you do like them, I would bet them there. And then the Atlas are actually mostly plus 250 places, but Bet365 is offering a boost to plus 275. Again, not much there, but again, there are better odds out there on Bet365. And then the Cannons Whipsnakes, you see their best odds are actually on DraftKings at plus 280 for Cannons and plus 310 for Whipsnakes. But I'll start with the Archers. Usually they haven't had that much success in the championship series, but I think this roster is a lot different than the past 2 seasons. They usually have a lot of their guys out, which, they still have some key players out. Tom Schreiber's one of them in particular, since he's playing in the NLL. But a guy like Mac O'Keefe, who was playing with the Seals in previous seasons, he's a big addition, I think, to this roster, especially with the 13-yard 2-point arc. So I think that's going to really come into play. The Archers really weren't known for taking a lot of 2-pointers in the series, which I think hurt them a little bit the past 2 years, just because it's closer in and you really can, like in basketball, make up and pull away using that 2-point arc. So I think you'll see them lean into that a little bit more. I don't know if they'll be, shoot the most 2-pointers of any team, but I do think they'll shoot more than they probably did in years prior. And then Grant Ament being healthy, and back is also a big plus for them. I also think they have a very strong stable of defenders and 2-way guys. You got Mason Woodward's a defender that's playing. He'll obviously have a short stick, but you have Bo Pedersen. Like you have a bunch of guys that, Piper Bond's another one that are obviously really good in the field game, short stick defensive minis, but can kind of go up and down the field as well. So That's kind of what you need in this Sixes style because it's so up and down. It's more like basketball. You kind of need those guys that not only can hold it down on the defensive end, just because, there's not a lot of defense going on. It's so quick, but it can also push and transition as well. So again, I do like the Archers more than I probably have in years prior. Cannons are probably my pick still, just because of the continuity from last year's championship series. You're returning most of the people that were on that championship series roster last year, as well as a lot of the people that were on the team in the summer. A lot of both Atlas, Whip Snakes, Archers are all kind of filling holes where Cannons aren't doing that a whole lot. They don't have a lot of guys that are, playing in the NLL or out for whatever reason with other coaching commitments and stuff. So I like the continuity there. And then some of the additions that they have on their roster too, like kind of bolster that. I think Will Manny, he has experience in Sixes. He played 2 years ago with the Archers. So having him and Holman back together, and then you talk about, again, guys that can kind of go up and down, Ethan Rawl, Bubba Fairman, Chris Islanian, it doesn't look like Pat Islanian's on the roster this year, but those are guys that, can kind of hold it down on the defensive end as well as push and transition. And then Colin Kirst is probably the X factor there because he is really good against long range shots. And we saw that last year. The Water Dogs and the Cannons both were great at defending the 2-pointer. And that's really how, teams can either, make their money or it can break them if they can shoot a lot of twos or if they give up a lot of twos. So I do like the Cannons. That'd probably be my pick. I don't know if I'm going to bet one a future to start like I did last year. I'm still kind of, seeing where things lay. But if I had to pick one, they'd probably be the one. But like I said, you can't really go wrong with a lot of these teams. I'll hit on the Atlas and the Whip Snakes real quick too. I wouldn't expect a bad showing from the Whip Snakes like we did 2 years ago. I think they'll figure it out. I think they've brought in a more dynamic roster this time around. They had a couple defenders only that were getting used to playing short stick the last time around. This time, you got Jacob Angelis is an addition, Will Marks an addition in net. That's big having two goalies that I think could really turn the tide. Both Krebs, who has experience in Sixes, and then Will Mark, who is also, a phenomenal goalie that just couldn't nail a roster spot last year because Kyle Bernlohr was the incumbent starter and then, obviously backup. So Tate Gallagher is another name that I think the Whip Snakes are being a little bit overlooked, just the fact that they have the longest odds. You got Matt Rambo. Also, he has experience in the NLL. That doesn't translate 100% to Sixes, but it does help. So some of these guys, I think, I think the Whip Snakes are being a little bit underrated. And then the Atlas are one that I would throw any of our preconceived notions about them away. Maybe not completely, but I think they have the strongest maybe coach in Stephen Brooks, given this format. I just don't think, and I don't think they're going to be bad either. I just don't think we're going to see the same style that we saw 2 years ago. They don't have as many dynamic 2-point threats. They don't have Romar Dennis. They don't have Jake Carraway. They still have Brian Costabile, so that's one. And I do think Connor Schellenberger, can shoot from range. But even a guy like Miles Jones, I don't think we're going to see Miles Jones pull up from the 2-point arc actually a ton. I just think he's more of a time and room 2-point shooter when we've seen him, score from range. And I think his biggest asset and value in this championship series is actually going to be dodging and distributing. He's a very good feeder, very underrated feeder. And I think using his size to draw a double quickly and move the ball, I think that's how you're going to see Miles Jones really find a lot of success. So I don't know if we'll see the run and gun 2-pointers left and right type of style that we saw from the Atlas in prior seasons. I think they're still going to be very good though. They have a really strong, a lot of strong players on this roster, as we mentioned. So again, I'm not underrating them at all. I just don't think it's going to be the same Atlas team we saw 2 years ago, just given the personnel changes. And, given Stephen Brooks's history, I do think he's probably the best coach right now going into this format, just based on their success in previous years. But he's going to have to reinvent this roster just a little bit, or reinvent the style of offense that they play.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, real quick before we move on, I think for me, if I weren't to go with the Archers, I would probably kind of go the same way you went with picking the Cannons or maybe the Atlas. I think for the Atlas, a lot of it really comes down to some of those kind of two-way guys, the transition guys you talk about, Camizio, Razanka, Ronan Jacoby. I think a lot of it's going to come down to how those guys play, especially early on in the championship series and what they can contribute. Because like you said, we know what guys like Costabile can do, but kind of taking some of that load off of him is going to be what they're going to be responsible for. So I think a lot of that for the Atlas in specific comes down to that. Moving on here, what are some things that you'll be looking at when it comes to making some bets for like certain games specifically? Like, are you looking more money line? Are you looking at totals? What are you going to be looking at?
Yeah, so I love betting totals. I feel like they're probably going to catch on by this time. It's now we got 2 years of data, and they're going into the third iteration of this. But we've seen the totals be way too low in 2023, so we bet a lot of overs. And then last year we saw them a little bit too high, so we bet some unders and stuff. So I love the live betting if you have the ability to live bet, because you can bet a over, and then maybe it's soaring over, and then you can actually bet an under live and kind of middle, I get a healthy middle if it's like 9 goal difference or whatever. That's kind of what I look for, like a threshold of like 7 to 10 goals or whatever. So, it's usually a pregame over, and then live under is usually what it is. But you might get a pregame under, and then it's like going way under, and you might say, hey, I think the scoring's going to pick up a little bit. I'll bet it over. That tends to not happen as much because they get tired after a while. So the things I would look for with the totals is just, seeing what it was compared to last year. And then, just factoring rest. They have, I think, done a better job of factoring rest this year and then years prior. And I think they have an extra roster spot as well, which will help. But these guys get tired after the second or third day, and those totals tend to drop a little bit too. So if we see a lot of goals that first day, don't be afraid to kind of, go against the grain if the totals seem a little bit higher, just to match what they were initially, and bet those unders and stuff. So I love the totals. I just think, trying to just think about some of the things like, the fatigue or whatever of these rosters and stuff. And then, are these teams going to go back and forth? Or are they going to slow it down a little bit? You can't really slow it down too much in sixes, and then the goalies, stopping those 2-pointers is a big thing as well, because that can really change the tide really quickly if teams are really putting a lot of 2-pointers away. So that's the one thing I look for totals. And then something in particular this year that I think we have to be very careful with. There's no way I can tell you how to bet it yet because we don't have lines. But instead of a sudden victory overtime period, it's now 4 minutes. So I don't know how these books are going to, post these lines. I assume they're going to post them, like normal, where, if it goes over, including overtime, then that's what it is. We might get where they post it and it'll just be the total excluding overtime. That happens sometimes. I don't think they're going to do that. So if they don't do that and you get a total and you think the game's going to be tight, be a little wary of betting that under, because if it does go to overtime, that's a quick way to kill your under bet. And now that's not, to be too scared of betting unders. I don't want you to scare people away, because usually unders are where the money's at. But that is something to keep of note. If teams are tied going in overtime, it's no longer going to be one more goal on top of that. We could see 4, 5, 6 goals on top of that. So that's going to be something to watch out for early on and stuff. And we'll see if the books, set totals that are kind of factoring that in or not. I mean, it's hard to factor in overtime because it doesn't happen all the time, but we did see it happen a few times last year. And now, rather than being sudden victory, it's going to be a 4-minute period regardless. So you'll see more goals. So that's one thing to look at. And then in terms of money line and spreads, this is where I say don't be afraid to bet, favorites on the spread and then underdogs on the money line, because the spreads are going to be kind of close early on. You're going to get probably 2, 3.5 goal favorites. Obviously, usually in the field, it's a little bit tighter, but teams can blow each other out in sixes. There's so many goals. So, if you like a team, don't necessarily lay the, 180 or 200 on the money line with them. Bet them -2.5, bet them -3.5. And then on the flip side, because the way I see it too, if you lose your bet, let's say they lose outright, so obviously they don't cover, you're actually probably like risking less if you're a bet to win person like me, where I bet 1.8 units on -180. Whereas on the money line side of things, don't be afraid to bet money line underdogs. Like, you're probably going to have to lay some juice to get the +1.5, +2.5. But if you think a team has a chance to keep it close and could win, don't be afraid to bet that money line instead. So that's kind of how I view the spread money line. It's kind of the same as how I bet the other lacrosse leagues, but especially in this format, like, you will see early on some shorter spreads, and some teams will win by 7 or 8 goals. It doesn't happen as much in the field, during the summer, but it will happen in sixes.
Talking with lacrosse betting expert Hutton Jackson here on Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. A couple of questions left for you here, Hutton, before we wrap up this episode, kind of previewing the 2025 PLL Championship Series. Taking a look now on the other side of this event with the WLL, which will be running their sixes event kind of alongside the PLL's event. Just looking at that from maybe a betting perspective, and this is a new thing, obviously, with the WLL and with this event that they'll be doing. How long do you think, you kind of touched on it with kind of how the PLL was those first couple of years with sixes, how long do you think it would take for things to really start kind of evening out betting wise with the WLL as they start to kind of catch on?
Yeah, I think, just got to be careful. I think the books are learning. They're new to this, so that could be seen as an opportunity. But it also could be, a situation where you're putting yourself at more risk than you probably want to on something that is so unknown. So I'd just be very cautious. If you're, let's say you're a $10, $15 better on the PLL, maybe only bet $5 on the WLL, or even like $2.50 or whatever. Like I definitely, bet a little bit less than you typically would. And again, if you're $100 better, maybe only you bet 50 or whatever, depending on your unit size. But I just think there's a lot of uncertainty. And it's a lot like the Athletes Unlimited. It's unfortunate that Athletes Unlimited changed rosters so often that, there's not really any betting data we can go off with that. And it was kind of completely different format anyway. I will say about the rosters, though, and kind of the futures, I think only DraftKings has futures right now. I'm assuming FanDuel will offer lines as well as DraftKings. Maybe it'll only be DraftKings off the bat. But again, like, if these rosters and these players from college and you think you have an advantage, then maybe, hey, you place a bet on one of these teams. I'm going to probably stay away. I know the Guard are the favorite, probably because Charlotte North is such a big name and everyone wants to bet them. The roster I think, though, is the strongest right now is the Charging. I just think you got the Tyrell sisters. Meg Carney's really good. Kylie Ohlmiller, I think she missed last season. She's coming back. Izzy Skane is like, honestly, on maybe slightly below Charlotte North, but very slightly below. It's a 1A, 1B situation with Izzy Skane in terms of star power. And then they got some good goalies too, in La Liberty and Duchette. So I think the Charging are probably my favorite going into this. But again, there's so much unknown. I don't even know if I'm going to bet any of these teams, going into the tournament. I think I'll just see how it plays out. And I think I'd, caution people, don't be afraid to watch how these first two games go. And then, you look at, hey, was this team really dominant? Should I bet them? Like, are they going to be undervalued? Like if they won? Or even I'd say, look at the losing side of things. Did this team lose by 3 or 4 goals, but were they right there at the end? Are they going to get like a favorable price? Because these books are going to kind of look at the box score. That's what you're going to realize is I think if you have the patience to wait and not bet those first 2 games, the sports books are going to look at the box score. They're going to set a line, and you might be able to get an advantage if, let's say, the Charging lose their first game, but you're like, hey, that team looks good. That team could have won that game. And I think they're going to do well the next game. So that's where I would kind of like, be patient and then attack. But Charging are one. And then, I'm not crazy about the Palms roster, but Sammy Jo Tracy is really good. Kayla Wood is an excellent defender. And Taylor Moreno, who won back-to-back AU titles. So she was the best player during the Athletes Unlimited for 2 seasons. That defense is going to be really, really strong, especially with Kayla Wood. So maybe look towards some unders in Palms games early on. It's tough to say because the totals, it's like I don't even know what they're going to set them at. I'm assuming it'll be similar to the championship series for PLL, but that's kind of my insight, a little bit of insight on what I think with the WLL. Again, I don't know the ins and outs of these rosters as well, but just looking at them, those are some players that stood out to me that, hey, maybe there's some value there.
Yeah, I think for me, real quick, and then I got one last question for you, and we'll wrap up this episode. I think for me, I do really like the Palms roster. I think, like you said, defensively, if Taylor Moreno can get back to what she was, not this past summer, but in years past, I think that she has the opportunity to, almost single-handedly win them some games in this championship series for the Palms. I think the defense that she's going to have in front of her with Knowles and Wood, probably 2 of the better defenders in this 4-team format that they're going to have. And then I do think they have some pieces there offensively that if they can be hitting some shots, They might not hit some overs like you were saying, but I definitely think they have a chance to at least win some games. I think Boston can be pretty sneaky. Yes, they have Charlotte North, but I do think they have some decent pieces that they've put around her. And then I do, as you said, I do really like New York's roster as well. I wasn't as familiar with their goalies on the New York squad, but I think, you make a couple saves in this sixes format that leads to some goals for players like Izzy Skane at the other end. So I do kind of like them. But like I said, just not as familiar with their goalies there. But last question for you here, Hutton, and then we'll wrap up this episode previewing the PLL Championship Series, talked in segment 1 with fantasy expert Paul Lamonaca. Not even from a betting perspective, I think just from looking at the product in general, what do you hope to see from this WLL product next week?
Yeah, I mean, I'm anticipating it being competitive, but really I just hope it's competitive. I hope there's no blowouts. I mean, we saw 2 years ago with the championship series, the Atlas kind of, blew everybody out. They ended up still losing in the championship, but, I hope it's competitive. And that's kind of where I'm hoping. And I hope that it's a style that, like, obviously we've seen women's sixes before, but I hope it's a style that really lends itself to a pro product. I will say one of the things, my qualms with the sixes is the lack of being able to replay goals right away, because there's so much scoring. There's no pauses, which makes it fast paced. But I think we like to see those highlight plays. So I hope that, whether it's like some TV timeouts or just in between periods, we get to see a lot of those highlights. I have no doubt that the ESPN broadcast will be top tier, but that's what I really hope to see is, a lot of competition between these teams, no blowouts, and a lot of, awesome goals, which I'm sure we're going to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like that. It looks like, at least from when I saw the schedule earlier today, it looks like a lot of the WLL games are going to lead into the PLL games too. So I think having them back to back like that is going to be really cool as well, just from a viewing perspective. And like you said, the ESPN product, even you look at the product that we got from them with Athletes Unlimited the last couple summers was really top notch as well. Kind of upset a little bit, I have to admit, as a broadcaster, not to have Joe Beninati doing the women's games anymore, but I think Jay Alter is going to do a pretty solid job kind of taking over for him in that respect. But yeah,
I'm with you. I love Joe B. As a Caps fan, he's the best. I wish he was calling more lacrosse games. I know we still get some Big Ten games from him. But yeah, it was awesome hearing him call the Athletes Unlimited games the past 3 years. So I wish we would have seen it too. He's in the area. So I know they're going more with the PLL known broadcasters, but yeah, I would have loved to see my guy Joe B in the booth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Hutton, thanks a lot for taking a few minutes of your time to talk with me here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Stevie. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this post, guys. You can also find the show just about anywhere you find your podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn. Again, basically anywhere you get your podcast, so check it out there and drop a follow as well. But that'll do it for me. I'll talk to you guys later.